The Navy SEALs were placing bets on how badly my sister would embarrass herself at the firing range. 20 minutes later, their commanding officer was asking her to train his men. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I know that sounds impossible. Trust me, if someone had told me this story, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I was standing right there when it happened, watching my little sister Zara completely shatter every assumption those elite warriors had about her. Let me paint you a picture of Zara Chen. She's my younger sister by 3 years, and at 24, she's this brilliant mechanical engineer from Portland who spends her days designing sustainable infrastructure and building bridges. When I say she's never held a military-grade weapon, I mean she literally asked me what the safety switch was when we arrived at the base. This is a woman who gets excited about concrete mixture ratios and owns more pocket protectors than most people have pens. Zara stands barely 5'3" in her work boots. Her fingers are permanently stained with ink from her engineering pens, and she wears these wire-rimmed glasses that she's constantly pushing up her nose when she's concentrating. If you saw her walking down the street, you'd probably guess she teaches high school math or works at the local library. You definitely wouldn't think she was about to outshoot some of America's most elite warriors. The crazy part is, none of us saw it coming. Not the SEALs who were literally betting against her, not their commanding officer who agreed to let her try their qualification course as some kind of joke. Not even me, and I've known Zara her entire life. I knew she was smart, sure. I knew she could solve problems that would make most people's heads spin. But this was something else entirely. See, what happened at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado that day wasn't just about my sister proving a bunch of cocky SEALs wrong. It was about discovering that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Sometimes the quiet engineer with paint under her fingernails and a notebook full of calculations can do things that will leave trained killers speechless. I'm telling you this story because it changed everything. It changed how those SEALs looked at people who didn't fit their mold. It changed how the Navy approaches marksmanship training. But most importantly, it changed my sister from someone who felt invisible and boring into someone who knew exactly how powerful she really was. What you're about to hear sounds like something out of a movie, but every single word of it happened exactly as I'm telling you. And by the end, you'll understand why Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne, a man who'd spent 15 years training the deadliest soldiers in the world, walked up to my sister after she finished shooting and said the words that still give me chills. "Ma'am, I think we're the ones who need to be taking notes. This is the story of the day my sister Zara went from being the butt of jokes to being the person those same jokers wanted to learn from. This is the story of how a mechanical engineer from Portland walked into a Navy base and walked out with the respect of every single person there. And this is the story of why you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones who are busy calculating while everyone else is talking. To understand how incredible what happened next really was, you need to know where Zara was in her life when this all went down. This was last spring, right after her world had basically fallen apart in the most devastating way possible. 3 weeks before our trip to the naval base, Zara's fiancé Marcus had walked out on her. Not for another woman exactly, but for someone he called more exciting and spontaneous. He told her she was too predictable, too boring, too focused on work. He actually said the words, "You're like dating a textbook," right before he packed his stuff and left their shared apartment. Can you imagine hearing that from someone you thought loved you? Zara had been planning their wedding for 8 months. She had spreadsheets for everything, color-coded timelines, backup plans for the backup plans. She approached their relationship the same way she approached her engineering projects, with careful attention to detail and systematic planning. To her, that showed how much she cared. To Marcus, apparently, it showed how boring she was. When she called me that night, crying so hard I could barely understand her words, my heart broke for her. She kept saying, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am just boring. Maybe I don't know how to be exciting." This is coming from a woman who designs bridges that span impossible distances, who solves problems most people can't even comprehend. But Marcus had made her believe that her greatest strengths were somehow flaws. So when I got invited to demonstrate, New tactical equipment at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as part of a defense contractor presentation. Bringing Zara along felt like destiny. I'd been working as a military contractor for 6 years, and she'd always been curious about what I actually did. The invitation allowed me one guest, and I thought maybe showing her a completely different world might help shake her out of this spiral of self-doubt. The morning we arrived at the base, Zara was a nervous wreck. I'd lent her some tactical gear that was way too big for her tiny frame. The vest hung off her shoulders like she was a kid playing dress-up, and the boots I'd gotten her squeaked with every step she took across the concrete. She kept adjusting her ponytail, checking if her glasses were clean, asking me every 5 minutes if she looked ridiculous. "Do I belong here?" she whispered as we walked past groups of Navy SEALs, preparing for their morning exercises. These guys moved like predators, all confidence and controlled power. Their conversations were filled with military jargon I barely understood, despite working with them for years. Everything about the base screamed strength, precision, and a kind of masculine energy that was completely foreign to Zara's world of blueprints and building codes. I watched her shrink into herself as we passed each group of soldiers. The woman who commanded respect in engineering meetings, who could explain complex structural calculations to city planners and construction crews, suddenly looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. She was doing that thing she'd done since we were kids, where she'd make herself as small as possible whenever she felt like she didn't fit in. But here's what I noticed that maybe she didn't. While she was busy feeling intimidated, she was also absorbing everything around her with that analytical mind that made her such an incredible engineer. She was watching how the soldiers moved, listening to their technical discussions about equipment, asking me quiet questions about the weapons and gear they were using. Even in her discomfort, her brain was working, cataloging information, trying to understand how everything functioned. The base itself was this incredible mix of cutting-edge technology and brutal efficiency. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. And every single person there moved with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what they're capable of. For someone like Zara, who was questioning her own worth, being surrounded by all that certainty must have been overwhelming. I remember thinking that bringing her here might have been a mistake. She looked so out of place, so vulnerable in that oversized gear. I started planning how I'd cut the visit short if she got too uncomfortable. I had no idea that within a few hours my quiet, insecure little sister would be the one teaching those confident warriors something they'd never forget. The equipment demonstration was going smoothly until Lieutenant Commander Rex Hawthorne noticed my sister. I was in the middle of explaining the new tactical communication system when I saw him watching Zara, who had pulled out her little notebook, and was scribbling furiously while I talked about signal range and frequency modulation. Hawthorne was exactly what you'd picture when you think Navy SEAL. 15 years of service, arms like tree trunks, and the kind of confident swagger that comes from knowing you're among the deadliest people on the planet. He had this way of looking at people like he was sizing them up for combat, and right now that intense stare was fixed on my sister. "Your girlfriend seems pretty interested in our toys," he said, walking over with that condescending smirk that immediately made my blood pressure spike. "Think she can handle more than just watching?" When I corrected him that she was my sister, his smirk got wider. He turned to his squad and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Hey guys, we've got an engineer here who thinks she understands our equipment better than we do." The way he said engineer made it sound like a joke, like her entire profession was something cute and harmless. That's when Sergeant Danny Kozlov piped up. This guy was built like a refrigerator and had the personality to match. "What's she gonna do, calculate the trajectory?" The other SEALs laughed, but it wasn't friendly laughter. It was the kind of laughter that makes your stomach twist because you know someone's about to get humiliated. Corporal Miguel Santos, who'd been quiet until now, decided to join in. "Maybe we should start her off with something easier, like a water gun." More laughter. I could see Zara's face turning red, but she kept writing in that notebook, her pen moving faster now. But the worst was Petty Officer Jake Morrison. This kid couldn't have been more than 25, all attitude and no sense. He looked Zara up and down and said loud enough for half the base to hear, "Should we get her a juice box and some participation medals? This is going to be painful to watch." I was about to step in and shut this whole thing down when something shifted in Zara's expression. She stopped writing, closed her notebook with deliberate precision, and removed her glasses. She cleaned them methodically, the same way she always did when she was thinking through a complex problem. "I'd like to try the qualification course if that's acceptable," she said, in that quiet but firm voice I'd heard her use in engineering meetings when someone questioned her calculations. The words cut through the laughter like a knife. The SEALs erupted. Kozlov actually started choking on his energy drink. Santos was doubled over laughing. Morrison was making jokes about calling the medics in advance for her shoulder after the recoil knocked her flat. But Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne wasn't laughing anymore. He was studying Zara with those calculating eyes, and I could see the wheels turning. Maybe he sensed an opportunity for some entertainment at her expense, or maybe something in her tone made him take notice. Either way, he held up a hand to quiet his men. "You want to try our standard marksmanship qualification?" he asked, his voice carrying that military authority that could shut down a room. "It's not a game. This is what we use to evaluate combat. Readiness." Zara nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I understand the parameters." The betting started immediately. Kozlov was taking odds on whether she'd even hit the target. Santos was betting she wouldn't make it through the first magazine. Without crying, Morrison was convinced she'd quit before she even got to the firing line. But I was watching my sister's face, and I recognized that expression. It was the same look she got when professors told her that women couldn't handle advanced engineering, physics. The same look when construction foremen dismissed her structural calculations. It was the look of someone who'd been underestimated their entire life and was absolutely done with it. The SEALs thought they were about to witness a humiliating failure. What they were actually about to see was my sister at her most dangerous, when everyone had counted her out before she'd even begun. While the SEALs continued expanding their betting pool and making increasingly crude jokes about my sister's inevitable failure, Zara did something that caught everyone off guard. She started asking questions. Not nervous, apologetic questions, but the kind of precise technical inquiries that made it clear she wasn't messing around. "What's the rifle specification?" she asked Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne directly, completely ignoring the snickering around her. "Barrel length, twist rate, and what ammunition grain weight are you using?" Hawthorne blinked, clearly not expecting that level of detail. "It's a standard issue M4A1 carbine, 14.5-inch barrel, 1-in-7 twist rate. We're using 62 grain green tip." "Ammunition. Wind conditions?" Zara continued, already pulling out her notebook again. "What's the current speed and direction, and how consistent has it been over the last hour?" Sergeant Kozlov stopped mid-laugh. "What the hell does wind have to do with anything? It's only 100 yards. Zara looked at him like he just asked why gravity mattered in physics. "Wind affects bullet trajectory even at short distances. A 5-mile-per-hour crosswind can shift point of impact by several inches at this range." She wasn't showing off. She was just stating facts the way other, people comment on the weather. Santos nudged Morrison and whispered something that made them both chuckle, but I noticed their laughter sounded less confident now. Even Hawthorne was starting to answer her questions seriously instead of treating them like entertainment. "Current. Wind is variable, 3 to 7 miles per hour from the southwest," he said, and I could tell he was beginning to respect the methodical way she approached the challenge. "Sight adjustments are standard military specification, zeroed at 25 meters for 300-meter battle zero." That's when I watched my sister transform completely. The nervous woman who'd been adjusting her glasses and worrying about her appearance vanished, replaced by the same focused engineer who'd graduated summa cum laude from MIT. This was the Zara who stayed up all night solving structural problems that stumped senior engineers, who could calculate load-bearing requirements in her head while other people needed computers. She spent the next 10 minutes studying the range like she was designing it from scratch. She observed wind patterns by watching the grass sway and the range flags flutter. She made notes about the lighting angle and shadows. She even asked about the altitude and humidity, factors that most recreational shooters never consider. "Can I dry fire the weapon a few times to understand the trigger mechanism?" she asked, and Hawthorne nodded, now watching her with genuine curiosity instead of amusement. The SEALs gradually stopped talking as they watched her handle the rifle. She didn't hold it like someone afraid of getting hurt. She held it like a precision instrument, which to her engineering mind, it absolutely was. She worked the action, tested the trigger pull, adjusted the stock length, and settled into a shooting position that looked surprisingly natural. The trigger breaks at approximately 4.5 pounds with minimal overtravel, she announced, more to herself than anyone else. Sight picture is clear with proper cheek weld and consistent eye relief. Morrison whispered to Santos. Does she actually know what she's talking about? But I could see that Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne was no longer viewing this as entertainment. He was watching a systematic approach to marksmanship that he'd never seen from a civilian. Zara was treating the shooting challenge like any other engineering problem that needed solving, breaking it down into measurable variables and controllable factors. She made calculations in her notebook about trajectory, accounting for the rifle's ballistic characteristics, environmental conditions, and human factors. She wasn't just hoping to hit the target, she was engineering a solution that would ensure success. I'm ready, she finally announced, standing up from her shooting position with the kind of quiet confidence that made the entire range fall silent. The betting had stopped. The jokes had died away. Even the most skeptical SEALs were now watching with genuine interest to see what this methodical engineer could do with their weapon. When Zara stepped up to the firing line, the entire range went dead silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She settled into her shooting position with the methodical precision of someone following a carefully calculated plan, adjusting her stance until everything aligned exactly the way her engineering mind had determined it should. The first shot cracked through the air like thunder, dead center bullseye. I heard Sergeant Kozlov mutter "holy shit" under his breath, but nobody else made a sound. They were all staring at the target through their spotting scopes, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Zara's second shot rang out before anyone could fully react to the first one. When the spotting scope confirmed it had gone through the exact same hole as the first shot, creating what shooters call a one-hole group. Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne actually took a step closer to get a better look. That's not possible, Morrison whispered, but his voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. By the third shot, you could have heard a pin drop on that range. By the fifth shot, even the most experienced SEALs had stopped looking through their scopes and were just watching Zara work. She moved like a machine, each shot following the same precise sequence. Breathe, align, squeeze, follow through, reload. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no emotion. She was shooting their standard qualification course, which requires hitting targets at various distances and positions. Standing, kneeling, prone, timed fire, rapid fire. Each position change was executed with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else in her life. While the SEALs typically took multiple attempts and plenty of coaching to achieve passing scores, Zara moved through the course like she'd been doing it for years. The targets told the story better than words ever could. Every shot was either dead center or so close to center that the difference was measured in fractions of inches. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was systematic excellence executed at a level that most of these elite warriors had never personally achieved. When she fired her final shot and set the rifle down on the bench, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne walked down range to personally inspect her targets, something I'd never seen him do during any qualification I'd witnessed. He came back shaking his head in disbelief. "Perfect score," he announced to the group. "Not just passing, not just excellent, perfect." That's when Zara did something that will stay with me forever. She calmly set down the rifle, removed her ear protection, and began explaining her approach like she was presenting engineering findings to a technical review board. "Marksmanship is fundamentally applied physics and engineering principles," she said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "You identify all the variables that affect accuracy, you account for each one systematically, you eliminate unnecessary movement and inconsistency, and then you execute with precision. It's not different from calibrating sensitive measurement equipment in my laboratory." The range remained absolutely silent as she continued. "The rifle is a precision instrument designed to deliver projectiles to specific coordinates. Environmental factors like wind, humidity, and temperature affect trajectory in predictable ways. Human factors like breathing, trigger control, and sight alignment are controllable variables. When you treat it as an engineering problem rather than a test of strength or aggression, the solution becomes straightforward. Santos looked like someone had just explained quantum physics using finger puppets. Morrison's mouth was literally hanging open. Even Kozlov, who'd been so confident about his betting pool, was staring at Zara like she'd just performed actual magic. But Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne's reaction was what really stunned everyone. He walked up to my sister, extended his hand for a formal handshake, and said words that still give me chills when I think about them. "Ma'am, would you be available to consult on improving our marksmanship training program? I think we could learn a great deal from your approach." The same SEALs who'd been placing bets on her failure 20 minutes earlier were now looking at her with genuine respect and asking if she'd be willing to share more of her insights. What happened in the hour after Zara finished shooting changed everything for everyone on that range. The betting pool money, all $230 of it, was immediately donated to the Wounded Warrior Project at Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne's direction. But more importantly, every single SEAL who had mocked my sister came up to her individually to apologize. Sergeant Kozlov was the first. This massive man who'd been making jokes about her calculating trajectories walked up to Zara with his head down and said, "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on appearances and I was completely wrong. What you just did was extraordinary, and I learned something important about judging people's capabilities." Corporal Santos was next, looking genuinely embarrassed. "I'm sorry for the water gun comment. That was unprofessional and stupid. You just taught us all something about precision that I'll never forget." Even Morrison, the youngest and cockiest of the group, managed to swallow his pride. I was way out of line with those participation medal jokes. You earned my respect today, and I'm sorry for being an ass. But the real transformation happened over the next 3 hours. Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne wasn't just being polite when he asked Zara about consulting on their training program. He meant it. They spent the afternoon in his office going over their current marksmanship protocols, and Zara identified inefficiencies that could benefit their entire training pipeline. She explained how their traditional approach focused, too, heavily on repetition without addressing the underlying mechanics of accuracy. "You're training muscle memory," she told him, "but you're not teaching the physics that make muscle memory effective. Understanding the why makes the how much more reliable." The story of what happened spread through the base like wildfire. By dinner time, Zara had gained a nickname that stuck, the Engineer. But it wasn't said mockingly anymore. It was said with respect, the way you'd refer to a legend. More importantly, the experience fundamentally changed how Zara saw herself. The woman who'd arrived that morning feeling boring and predictable drove home that evening, knowing she possessed skills that could leave elite warriors speechless. She discovered that her analytical mind and methodical approach weren't flaws to be fixed. They were superpowers waiting for the right moment to shine. 3 months later, Zara quit her job at the engineering firm where she'd been feeling undervalued and started her own consulting company. She specializes in bridging the gap between civilian engineering principles and military applications, helping defense contractors improve their equipment design and training protocols. 6 months after our visit to Coronado, she received something that still hangs framed in her office: a formal commendation from the United States Navy for her contributions to their improved marksmanship training program. Her systematic approach had been incorporated into their instruction manual, and qualification scores across multiple bases had improved measurably. But the most important change was personal. Zara never again let anyone make her feel small for being different. When she started dating again, she looked for someone who appreciated her intelligence rather than someone who wanted her to dim it. She found him too, another engineer named David who thinks her systematic approach to life is fascinating rather than boring. The deeper lesson here goes beyond just my sister's story. We live in a world that often values loud confidence over quiet competence, that mistakes aggression for strength and assumes expertise comes in predictable packages. What happened that day at the naval base was a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone underestimates. Zara's story taught those SEALs something crucial about assumptions and respect. It taught me something about recognizing strength in unexpected forms, but most importantly, It taught my sister that being different isn't something to apologize for, it's something to weaponize. Sometimes the most powerful victories don't come from meeting other people's expectations. They come from showing the world capabilities they never knew existed, delivered by someone they never saw coming.